My name is Julia, 35 years old, living in Chicago, and I was once the person holding together a three-generation financial empire from collapse. But that night, as I was finalizing an investment strategy for a $20 million deal, my phone lit up with a message from the family group chat. We think it's best if you step back for a while. No call, no explanation, just a thumbs-up emoji from Aunt Carol, the same woman who once held me the night I lost my parents and called me her second daughter. Have you ever been cast out of someone's life, someone you loved deeply, with just one cold message? If you have, I invite you to share your story in the comments. And if you believe that sometimes silence rings louder than words, hit like and subscribe. Because what I did after that brought my entire family to its knees. I still remember the day I stepped into the Reed family home. I was 8 years old, my knees scraped and bleeding after falling on the way from the orphanage, clutching a torn teddy bear my mother left behind after the accident. Uncle Robert and Aunt Carol had arrived to pick me up in neatly pressed suits, more like corporate executives stepping out of a glossy brochure than people about to welcome a grieving child into their home. I didn't know much about them, only that they were distant relatives on my mother's side and that Uncle Robert was someone who worked with money. It didn't take long to learn more. The Reed family was one of Chicago's oldest financial dynasties, running Reed Capital Management, an investment firm with a client base that stretched across the country. But even while living in a whitestone mansion in the Lake Forest suburbs, eating dinner beneath crystal chandeliers, sitting at a table with a chair engraved with my name, I was never truly considered part of the Reed bloodline. Aunt Carol was always gentle, but in her eyes, I never saw the same light she gave to Ben, their biological son. Ben was 6 years older and constantly referred to as the future of the company. Me. Even though I was a straight A student, polite, always silent during client dinners without dropping a single fork, I was just niece Julia. By high school, I could read financial reports like other kids read comic books. While Ben skipped school to drag race and throw basement parties, I was quietly working through Uncle Robert's collection of classical economics books. No one noticed. No one cared. I got accepted to Harvard with a full scholarship and graduated with honors before turning 21, holding dual degrees in finance and statistics. When I brought my transcript to the dinner table, Aunt Carol smiled faintly and turned to Ben. Would you like to enroll in that summer business program in Europe? Ben had once been suspended for cheating on a midterm. The family covered it up like it never happened. I overheard Aunt Carol telling her friends, Ben's just too smart for the system to understand how his mind works. After graduation, I didn't plan to return to Reed Capital. But Uncle Robert offered me a job. Your family, Julia, he said, resting his hand on my shoulder. We keep things in the family. I agreed, thinking maybe, just maybe, it was a chance to prove I belonged. But on my first day, I wasn't introduced as the new investment advisor. I was called into a boardroom, where Uncle Robert announced to the entire leadership team, Julia will be Ben's strategy assistant. I froze. Assistant. That's right. Ben's been with the company since his freshman year, and there's much you can learn from him, he said while Ben leaned back with a smirk. Family is the best training ground. I said nothing. I just nodded and stepped out, eyes stinging. I had turned down an offer from a major investment bank in New York, thinking that coming home meant being trusted, mentored. But to them, I was still just the orphan they'd taken in. Ben never understood the market. His office was a snack hub and Excel spreadsheets were for nerds. I'm not one to brag, but I stayed in the office past 2, sometimes 3 in the morning, fixing financial plans Ben had signed off on, full of errors. Whenever a deal succeeded, Ben gave the speech. I stood in the corner holding the portfolio he used to sound smart. When clients complimented the market analysis, Ben just smiled. I have a good gut. Aunt Carol often walked into my office with her trademark soft voice. Don't overwork yourself, sweetheart. Just help Ben stay on track, okay? Once I challenged Ben's idea in a meeting. He wanted to invest in a tech company with suspicious financial reports. Uncle Robert cut me off mid-sentence. You're too theoretical, Julia. Finance is also about intuition. You haven't learned that yet. After the meeting, I walked onto the balcony that overlooked the city park. A gust of wind blew my hair up and my chest tightened, not from anger but from clarity. I was starting to realize that no matter how competent I was, no matter how hard I worked, I would always be an outsider here. But I didn't cry. I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, and typed the first headline of a project no one in the family knew about. Something I would build from scratch. A place where my worth didn't need anyone's permission to exist. 3 months into Reed Capital, I started spotting holes in the firm's risk analysis models. They were outdated, rigid, and couldn't keep up with the fast-changing markets, especially in fields like biotech and artificial intelligence. At first, I suggested minor updates during the strategy team meetings. Ben glanced at his phone during my presentation, then waved me off. Sounds too complicated. Clients don't care about this stuff. I didn't argue. But after hours, I stayed late. I reopened raw data sets, studied market fluctuations by client demographics, and rewrote the entire risk model, integrating machine learning so it would adapt in real time. I didn't do it to impress anyone. I did it because mediocrity made me sick. 3 weeks later, I applied the algorithm to a group of middle-income clients invested in tech stocks. After 1 quarter, their returns rose by an average of 18.2%, 3 times higher than the firm's reported growth. I handed the analysis to Ben. He skimmed it and nodded. Nice. I'll use this in the Florida client meeting next week. Can you prep the slides? I stood there watching him jot down a few bullet points on a sticky note. He didn't ask what I built, how it worked. He just slapped a label, Strategic Insights, and walked off like he was ordering pizza. A week later, I got an email from PR. Press conference for new growth strategy. Keynote speaker, Ben Reed. My name wasn't on the guest list. I asked Aunt Carol and she just gave me that sweet smile. You know you're best behind the scenes. Don't make Ben feel small. I wanted to ask, what about me? Am I allowed to feel anything at all? But I didn't speak. I just went back to my room, closed the door, turned on the desk lamp, and opened my laptop. I called Allison, my best friend from college, now a financial attorney at a private firm in San Francisco. She answered after 3 rings. Allison, I need to start a new company. She paused. You're joking. I'm not. I want to launch an independent investment firm. Not under my name for now. Julia, you're working at one of the biggest family funds in the Midwest. You know people would kill for that seat, right? I know. But I also know when something isn't mine. Allison didn't ask more. 3 days later, she sent me all the legal documents to register a firm called Nova Asset Strategies. Temporary headquarters. A co-working space on Chicago's West Side. Legal agent on paper, Allison. Real operator, me. I began feeding into Nova all the ideas Reed Capital refused to support. Financial models I wrote during lunch breaks. Predictive algorithms I tested but were deemed too complicated. Now they finally had a place to breathe. I didn't take any clients from the old company. I didn't violate a single clause in my contract. I simply called 2 friends from Harvard who now run a tech startup. They let me pilot some low-risk investment models in the green energy market. The first quarter brought a return of just 9%, but it was enough for them to refer me to 3 more people. Bit by bit, I built Nova at night, while by day I continued to sit in my seat as strategic assistant, under someone who couldn't tell the difference between cash flow and net profit. I didn't tell anyone in the family. Not Uncle Robert, not Aunt Carol. I still had Sunday dinners with them. Still attended internal meetings. Still sat beside Ben and nodded as he read aloud the very ideas I had written. But inside, something was slowly detaching from that family dinner table. One night, while I was working late at Nova's office, Allison called. Are you sure you want to stay quiet like this? That solar energy project you invested in just made the news. If Reed Capital finds out, they'll... I'm living in their house, eating at their table, but they've never really seen me, I said. So let me stay invisible a little longer. When they finally look again, I won't be in the same seat. Allison sighed. You're dangerous in silence. I didn't respond. I just looked out the window. Chicago was lit up like a golden map. In that light, I knew one thing. I wasn't doing it for praise. I was doing it for choice. So that one day, I wouldn't have to ask anyone's permission to decide my own fate. The 50th anniversary of Reed Capital was held at the Palmer House, the most luxurious hotel in Chicago. They rented out the grand ballroom, decorated it in classic style with candles, crystal glasses, and soft jazz from a live band behind the podium. I arrived right on time in a simple black dress, hair tied up neatly, nothing flashy. My name wasn't on the program. I wasn't listed as a speaker. I wasn't mentioned in any of the company's recap videos. Still, I showed up, like a proper guest, in the role and place they always reserved for me, a seat at the far end of the table just behind the event coordinator's assistants. When the MC read Ben's name and introduced him as the strategic architect of the decade, the applause roared through the room. I sat still, resting my hand on my glass of water, smiling like I always had. Ben stepped up to the stage, adjusted the mic, and nodded like a composed leader. 3 years ago, Reed Capital faced major challenges: volatile markets, high-risk portfolios, anxious clients. But with the right leadership, we overcame those hurdles and expanded into new sectors, achieving the highest return rates since 2008. I listened to every word, every number mentioned. I saw myself in every chart, every growth bar, because all of them were results of models I had once quietly proposed and tested. No one mentioned my name. But I wasn't surprised. I didn't feel hurt anymore. As the guest stood up to congratulate him, I walked toward the end of the hallway, away from the crowd. The door leading to the back terrace was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped into the cool October evening air. Below, the city lights glowed. I looked out at those lights and thought about the nights at Nova's office. No red carpets, no gold nameplates, but there was freedom. There was a voice. There was existence. "You shouldn't be out here alone, it's cold." I turned around. It was Amanda, Uncle Richard's daughter, my cousin, the only one in the family who had never looked down on me. "It's too stuffy inside," I said, eyes fixed on the street below. Amanda stepped beside me, arms crossed. "I saw you nearly cry when Ben got that loud applause." I chuckled softly. It wasn't about Ben. It was about me. About all those years I believed if I was good enough, they'd automatically recognize me. You did what none of them ever could. And because of that, they had to push me out. To preserve the image they built. Amanda was silent for a moment, then tilted her head toward me. "You have that look in your eyes, like my mom did when she realized she had missed something huge she could never get back." I turned to meet Amanda's gaze. "Are you planning to stay in this company forever?" He shrugged. "Mom made me study marketing, but I always wanted to study interior design. I still have a few old sketches." "Have you ever thought of walking away?" "I have. But I don't have capital. No one backing me. And no one believes I can do it." I rested my hand on the railing. I didn't need a backer. I needed a map. So I drew my own. A light breeze passed by. Amanda shivered slightly. I took the coat in my hand and draped it over her shoulders. "If you ever need to draw your own map, tell me." I returned to the ballroom just as the fireworks outside began. People raised glasses, posed for photos, capturing what the Reed family called the pinnacle of 50 years. I stood in the very back among uniformed servers and quietly snapped a photo of the glowing sky. Not to keep as a memory, but to mark something. Tomorrow I would begin to activate the second phase of the plan I'd spent 3 years building. Not for revenge, but to quietly step out of a frame they never meant for me to appear in. Gracefully, coldly, and without asking anyone's permission. The text came in on a Wednesday afternoon, right as I was reviewing the internal audit plan for the next quarter. My phone vibrated with a single line from the family group chat. "We think it's best if you step back for a while." No explanation. No meeting. No call. Just a short message along with a thumbs-up emoji from Aunt Carol, the woman who once sat beside me as I learned to write my first numbers. The one who once promised, "You'll always have a place in this family as long as you stay true to your values." I set the phone down. The quiet was almost eerie. No tears. No outrage. Just a silence that felt like the entire world had paused with the beat of my heart. I didn't respond to that message. I didn't ask why. I already knew. 3 days earlier, in a closed meeting with Reed Capital's key stakeholders, I had firmly opposed a real estate deal pitched as a fast profit opportunity on the Florida coast. I laid out clearly that the chain of companies behind the project showed signs of cash flow obfuscation and ties to an international money laundering network already under suspicion by the SEC. Ben brushed off my warning. "You're always suspicious of everything. We're just investing. It's not like we're criminally liable if something's wrong on their end." I didn't argue. I just looked Uncle Robert in the eye and asked, "Are you certain you want the company's signature on a deal that could later be criminally investigated?" No one answered. But I knew. The irritation in their eyes wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a verdict. And that afternoon the message confirmed it all. I opened my laptop without hesitation. Every step I took had already been mapped. Not because I expected this to happen, but because I had never allowed my entire future to rest in someone else's hands. I logged into Reed Capital's asset management system, where I was one of 4 people with top-tier access. My personal investment account held $6.8 million, including the gains I had earned over 5 years of investing in the family fund. I began the process of transferring the entire amount to my personal account under Nova Asset Strategies, using an intermediary system I had established earlier to avoid triggering any financial binding clauses. I carefully documented each step, took screenshots, and saved everything in a secure off-system data vault. Then I sent an official withdrawal notice to the partner bank, along with a copy to the family law office. I cited Clause 14.3 of the Internal Capital Contribution Contract, a clause hardly anyone paid attention to, which allowed full withdrawal if the contributor had evidence of ethical misconduct by the managing firm. I didn't need to present that evidence immediately. Citing the clause was enough to trigger a temporary audit and freeze the account for up to 3 days. Once all the notices were sent, I opened a folder labeled Falcon, an encrypted file containing all the financial algorithm patents I had developed over the past 8 years. I signed over the full intellectual property rights to an independent legal trust Allison had set up last year, one where I was the sole beneficiary. That trust was beyond Reed Capital's jurisdiction. Finally, I logged into Nova's client contract system. Over the last 3 years, I had quietly inserted a personal advisor supremacy clause into each agreement, meaning that if I ever left any organization, the clients could transfer their entire portfolios with me without prior notice. I verified every legal document had been signed properly, notarized, and stored redundantly in 3 separate locations. All of this happened in less than 48 hours. I didn't get much sleep. But I wasn't tired. That Friday night, I sat in my apartment, the soft amber light casting a glow on the ceiling. I held a cup of black tea and looked out over the city. The traffic still rushed by below. Red lights, green lights blinking like always. But inside me, everything had shifted. I had stepped away, just like they asked. But I hadn't walked away empty-handed. I left with everything they once ignored, diminished, or stole, and held it in my hands on my terms. Without asking, without permission, without bowing. The next morning I woke at 6:30. The apartment was quiet just like always, with the early sunlight angling through the white curtains, casting lines across the desk where I had spent the past 2 nights. I made a cup of black coffee, opened my phone, and waited almost 4 minutes for all the messages to finish loading. Missed calls 38. Texts 61. Emails from Reed Capital's internal system 11. WhatsApp family group notifications. Countless. I didn't open any of them right away. Instead, I sat in my chair, sipped the coffee, and turned on the small kitchen TV. The screen lit up just as CNBC's morning business report scrolled across the bottom. Insider sources. Reed Capital suspends Henderson Fund disbursement. Reason undisclosed. I smiled. The news spread faster than I had anticipated. Henderson Holdings was one of the largest deals Reed Capital had ever negotiated, a commercial investment project worth $24 million, scheduled for final signing on Monday afternoon. Reed Capital had committed $8 million in upfront cash. But with $6.8 million just withdrawn, the fund now faced a serious liquidity gap and was automatically frozen by the bank due to risk activity flags. At 7:13 a.m. my phone rang. Ben's number. I let it ring until it stopped. Then came a call from Aunt Carol. Then Uncle Richard. Then the legal office administrator. I didn't answer. I waited until exactly 8 o'clock, then opened the first message. Ben, 6:42 a.m. What the hell are you doing? Henderson is waiting for the transfer. The bank froze the account. Do you even realize you just collapsed the entire firm? Aunt Carol, 7:04 a.m. Julia, if something's bothering you, please talk to me. This is serious. We need to stay calm. Uncle Richard, 7:25 a.m. You've gone too far. This is outright sabotage. Do you know what legal consequences you're facing? I didn't respond immediately. I opened my laptop, checked for the bank confirmation, They acknowledged receiving my valid withdrawal request and were awaiting my final verification to complete the transaction. At 8:20 I opened WhatsApp. The Reed family group was blowing up. Ben, Julia, you're the only one authorized to confirm the transaction. If you don't act, the bank can't unfreeze it. Henderson will pull out. Do you understand? Uncle Robert, call me. Immediately. Allison, 8:33 a.m. Private message, everything is going according to plan. The bank will keep the transaction frozen until you confirm. No one else has signing authority. They never expected you to be this prepared. I put the phone down, took a sip of coffee, and took a screenshot of Ben's message. Then I sent it back into the group with a single line. I'm respecting the family's decision. I've already stepped away. No one replied for 5 minutes. Then my phone vibrated nonstop. New messages flooded in so fast that the screen displayed, "You're receiving more than 25 messages in 2 minutes." I didn't read them. I unplugged the charger, locked my phone, and stepped out onto the balcony to take a long breath. The November air was crisp, but I no longer felt cold. I had once stayed silent when my name was erased from the speaker list. I had once faked a smile when someone else presented my ideas and got all the applause. But now, with just one message and a withheld confirmation, the entire family fund stood on the edge of collapse. 9 o'clock, Allison called back. I picked up. You're so damn composed, she said, half in awe, half concerned. I just spoke with the bank's branch director. They're getting almost 10 calls an hour from Reed's side, throwing every form of pressure at them. But they can't release anything without your final go. And I haven't given it, I said calmly. How long are you planning to let them sit like this? Until they understand I'm no longer the silent shadow behind their contracts. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just stepping away on time. I'm not asking to stop you. I just want to make sure you're solid. I've never been more certain. She paused a few seconds, then let out a soft laugh. Then let them panic. Let them know what it feels like to be left behind. When I hung up, a new email popped up on my screen. Henderson Holdings had just sent an official withdrawal notice, citing failure to meet financial requirements. I opened the attachment, read it carefully, and saved the file. A $24 million deal had just evaporated from Reed Capital's hands. All because of one command I hadn't sent. And I still had no intention of sending it. They told me to step away. So I did. But it wasn't just one step out of the company. I pulled out the foundation they never realized I had built. And as they look around amidst the wreckage, maybe they'll finally understand. I wasn't the only one who left. What left with me was the value they had failed to see for far too long. 9 o'clock sharp on Monday morning, I opened my apartment door in a navy blue suit, a silver hand watch on my wrist, a gift from a Japanese client when Nova surpassed 100 million in assets under management. Standing at the door was Jonathan Marks, the family attorney who had worked with the Reeds for nearly 20 years. He wasn't easily shaken, but today he looked more cautious than usual, holding a thick file folder with tension written all over his face. Julia, he nodded. The family wants me to review possible legal actions. I figured, I said, stepping aside to let him in. I led him to the living room, where I had already arranged a round table with 2 chairs. In the center sat a thick, gray-labeled folder. Nova Asset Strategies, Legal Structure, IP Ownership. You didn't invite anyone else? Jonathan asked, glancing around. I thought we should start privately. You can report back to them however you see fit. He took a seat and opened the file. I didn't speak right away. I stood, walked over to the bookshelf by the window, and pulled out a small white presentation board. I turned it toward him gently, revealing a logo, an 8-pointed star on a deep blue background. Nova Asset Strategies, I said, placing a hand softly on the logo. Founded 3.5 years ago. Operates independently. No legal affiliation with Reed Capital. Licensed in Delaware. Legal representative, Allison Layton, formerly with Wharton Hughes. Jonathan studied me. You ran this while still working at Reed? I never breached my contract. The clause on personal financial activity in my Reed employment agreement allows for private investment channels, as long as they don't directly compete or draw from Reed Capital's client list. I remember that clause. It was written to let family members invest in personal stocks. And I complied, I replied evenly. Every Nova client was outside Reed's list. They were individuals or newly formed funds. I have the contracts to prove it. I inserted a USB into my laptop and projected the screen onto the TV on the wall. Jonathan straightened up as charts appeared. Cash flow, return rates, quarterly growth. Nova currently manages $420 million in assets, spread across 11 portfolios. Average return over the past 3 years, 16.4%. Last quarter, Reed Capital only reached 7.1%. Jonathan frowned. How did no one know this? I didn't need them to know, I said. And I owed no one an explanation. I clicked to the next slide. These are 9 patents officially registered with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, owned solely by me, not through Reed. They cover financial algorithms using AI for market analysis and investment behavior prediction. He flipped through the file, his expression shifting from cautious to unsettled. And this, I handed him another folder, is a set of personal contracts with 17 high-net-worth clients, mostly retirement and family wealth funds. Each one includes a clause. If I leave Reed Capital, they may transfer their entire portfolio to me without seeking permission. All of them legally binding? Notarized. Some have countersigned confirmations from the client's attorneys. Others include priority clauses that originated from original contracts drafted by Reed. I just added transfer rights. Jonathan sat silently for a long moment. He spun the pen in his hand, staring at me like he was weighing between surprise, fear, or admiration. I was sent to ask you to restore the funds you withdrew from Reed, he said slowly. The family believes your actions caused severe damage to the Henderson deal. That's not possible, I replied. Those are my assets withdrawn through proper channels and in line with contracts. I submitted documentation to the bank and they verified everything. And the threats of legal action over unfair competition? No grounds. No conflict of interest, no data theft, and I never approached a Reed client while employed there. He exhaled. You know they won't stop. Ben is furious. He's even thinking about holding a press conference. Ben can say whatever he wants. But if needed, I have a recording of the meeting 3 weeks ago where he admitted approving the Florida deal, knowing there were money laundering risks. I haven't released it, out of basic decency. Jonathan raised an eyebrow. You recorded him? I know when I need to protect myself, I said softly. And I'm not letting anyone else define my role in this story. He looked at me a moment longer. Carol. She was speechless when she found out. She couldn't believe you kept everything so hidden. I wasn't hiding, I said calmly. They just never really looked. Jonathan closed the folder. I need to report back to them. I think you should. And advise them to think very carefully about their next move. I walked him to the door. Just before stepping into the elevator, he turned back. I've been in law for 30 years. This is the first time I've seen a woman flip an entire board without raising her voice. I didn't respond. I just smiled slightly. Not out of triumph. But because I knew, this was just the beginning. From now on, every move on the board would start with my hand. Tuesday morning, exactly 8:30, the doorbell rang. Through the camera, I saw nearly the entire Reed family. Uncle Robert at the front, beside him Aunt Carol, her face pale but carefully made up. Ben trailed behind, tapping on his phone as he walked. Jonathan Marks stood at the center, carrying the heavy legal folder. I opened the door and welcomed them in without much word. Inside, the warmth of my apartment mingled with the scent of freshly brewed coffee, oakwood undertones, and sunlight pouring through the curtains. The dining room had been arranged like a proper boardroom. 6 chairs around an oval table, each place set with a leather-bound document folder, a silver pen, and a steaming cup of coffee. No head seat. I wanted them to understand. This table had no hierarchy anymore. Only balance. They took their seats cautiously. Jonathan spoke first. Julia, thank you for receiving us. As you know, Henderson Holdings has issued their final notice. They will cancel the deal within 24 hours if they don't receive a minimum deposit of $5 million. I nodded slightly, expression neutral. I'm aware. And I can help. Ben leaned forward. So you're going to transfer the money back? I looked at him, then turned to Uncle Robert. Not a transfer back. I'm offering to loan $5 million from Nova Asset as an emergency bridge. 30-day term, 4.5% interest, market standard, with a priority recovery clause in case of internal disputes. Ben slammed his hand on the table. You're charging your own family interest? I didn't look at him. I simply refilled Jonathan's coffee. No one's forcing Reed Capital to borrow. This is a professional legal offer to salvage a deal on the brink of collapse. Aunt Carol gently touched my arm. Julia, family shouldn't keep score like this. I set the coffee pot down, my voice low but clear. Aunt, when I contributed $4.5 million to the family fund, no one asked if I needed to keep track. When I was removed from the meeting list, no one said, a family shouldn't do that. Now I'm offering a fair choice. The table fell silent. Jonathan flipped through several pages of documents, nodding slightly. The terms are reasonable, nothing shady. Disbursement will take place within 6 hours of signing. I turned the file around, opening to the next page. However, the condition for this loan to be disbursed is that Reed Capital agrees to name Nova Asset as an official strategic partner, with co-approval rights on all investment deals exceeding $3 million. I won't return to the company. But from now on, every major decision will require my sign-off, or the sign-off of someone I designate. Uncle Robert looked up, his voice noticeably lower. You want to control the company? I want to protect my money. And if I don't have strategic influence, then lending this money is just handing a knife back to someone who already stabbed me in the back. Ben gave a sharp laugh. This is blackmail. I set my pen down on the table. No, Ben. This is negotiation. If it were blackmail, I would have already released the recording of you approving the Florida deal, even knowing there were signs of money laundering. No one spoke for a long while. Aunt Carol looked at Jonathan, then turned to Uncle Robert. Robert, if we don't have the money, Henderson will walk. Years of work will vanish. Uncle Robert didn't look at anyone. He slowly twisted the pen in his hand, then nodded slightly. We accept. Ben jumped up from his chair, but Uncle Robert raised his hand to stop him. Sit down. I pulled the contract from my briefcase and handed it to Jonathan. I've already signed it. Just need a Reed Capital representative to sign and send the documents to the partner bank. Jonathan carefully turned through each page. Uncle Robert signed first, followed by Aunt Carol, her eyes still fixed on me. Ben refused to sign. No one pressured him. At exactly 11:42, the contract was submitted. I tapped the button to authorize disbursement. $5 million left Nova's account and was transferred to Henderson Holdings ahead of the 6-hour deadline as promised. I stood up, gathered the coffee cups and brought them to the sink. Behind me, I heard the soft scrape of chairs being pushed back, the click of file folders closing. No one said thank you. But no one dared to look at me the same way they used to. I turned around slowly and said, starting today, I no longer sit in the background. And if anyone asks why, just tell them, I'm doing exactly what they taught me, protecting the value I built. Uncle Robert stood, bowing his head slightly. We'll honor every term. And Julia, whatever happens, I hope you don't cut us off completely. I looked at him. I didn't smile, but I didn't look away either. I'm not tearing anything down. I'm just restructuring a building everyone assumed I wasn't allowed to touch. The door closed behind them. And in that moment, the air in my home felt strangely quiet. Light. No longer weighed down by the silent corners I had been pushed into for the past 10 years. That afternoon, after they left the apartment, I sat alone by the window, still holding a coffee cup gone completely cold. The pale sunlight slipped across the dark wood edges of the window ledge. The city was still noisy as ever, but inside me, something had gone completely still. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel victorious. It just felt like I had finally shut a door that had creaked for years without anyone bothering to oil the hinges. Around 4 o'clock, Jonathan called back. He said the family wanted to meet again. Not to negotiate, but to clarify a few necessary things. I agreed, but insisted the meeting take place at my home, and without Ben present. Jonathan hesitated briefly, then agreed. At 6 p.m. they returned. Uncle Robert, Aunt Carol, Jonathan, and Uncle Richard, the man who had barely looked at me for more than a few seconds in any meeting before. I served tea instead of coffee, and there were no printed packets or legal pads on the table. Everyone sat around a simple round wooden table, the warm yellow glow from the pendant light above softening some of the tension that hadn't yet been spoken aloud. I invited you all, I began, not to revisit the contract. That's done. But I believe there's something else that needs to be made clear, so we don't misunderstand each other moving forward. Uncle Robert raised an eyebrow while Uncle Richard clenched his hands slightly. Jonathan set his teacup down, his eyes steady on me. I have copies of all documents related to the Blue Harbor project in Florida, I said, my tone even. Among them is evidence that funds transferred from the local investment fund, Wellspring Land Holdings, of which Uncle Richard is a secondary shareholder, were routed through 3 shell companies in the Caribbean, then returned to the U.S. as foreign investment capital. No one spoke. I continued. I also have partial recordings of the meeting 3 weeks ago, where Ben clearly said, "Everything's been arranged, no one's going to look too deep." Aunt Carol trembled, placing a hand over her mouth. Uncle Richard's face flushed red, but he didn't speak. Jonathan looked down, took a long breath, and asked softly, "When did you start collecting all this?" "I didn't set out to expose anyone," I replied. "But I've become too familiar with how this family reacts when someone says something they don't want to hear. I needed a way to protect myself in case I was branded a traitor, or pushed out again like before." Aunt Carol suddenly stood, her eyes brimming with tears. "Julia, do you think I didn't know? Do you think I would go along with something like that?" I didn't respond right away. I walked slowly toward her. "You didn't go along. But you never stopped it either. You chose to look away." She began to cry, not loudly but a muffled sob she tried hard to suppress, then sank back into her chair like someone slipping out of the shoes they had confidently walked in for decades. I turned back to Jonathan and Uncle Robert. "I don't intend to notify the SEC. I'm not sending files to the Federal Financial Crimes Division. But I'm keeping everything. And if any terms of the new partnership are broken, if I'm forced to pull funds or my approval rights are undermined through any internal maneuvering, then the files will no longer remain buried." Uncle Richard stammered, "That sounds like a threat." "No," I said calmly. "It's an ethical safeguard. Not to send anyone to prison, but to ensure I don't have to live one more day in fear or suspicion of my own family." Uncle Robert clenched his fists. In that moment, I saw a man who once radiated certainty, once ruled a financial dynasty with force, but now looked at me as if he had just realized he'd lost the one person who had been quietly loyal all along. Aunt Carol grasped my hand, her voice trembling like a child's. "You don't have to do this. I know I've stayed silent too long. But you don't need to become so cold." I gently pulled my hand away. Not harshly. Not to reject her. I don't need revenge. I just need peace. And peace doesn't come from late apologies. It comes from no longer needing to brace myself. Outside the glass window, the sky had started to dim. The first streetlights flickered on, illuminating roads still bustling, still noisy, as if everything were completely normal. But for me, that version of normal had never existed. And now I was quietly, deliberately rewriting its definition. 3 days after the final meeting with my family, I received an unexpected message from Amanda. "Do you have time for a cup of coffee? I need to talk, not as family." I agreed to meet her at a small cafe in West Loop, the kind of place I frequented whenever I needed to escape the tempo of work. Amanda arrived early. Her face was bare, her hair tied hastily, hands twisted together beneath the table. "I want to leave Reed Capital," she said, no preamble. I looked up at her, held her gaze in silence for a few seconds. "Why?" "Because I'm tired," Amanda sighed. "Tired of writing reports no one reads. Tired of watching people like you get pushed out while people like Ben get promoted. I used to think I wasn't good enough to fight back. But when you stood up, I started to believe maybe I deserve something better too." I stirred the coffee in front of me. "And what do you want from me?" "I want to work at Nova," Amanda said slowly. "Not because you're family, but because you're the only person who's ever done what I've only dared to dream of. I studied communications, I have experience in brand development, but no one has ever given me a real chance. If you're willing, I want to try." I looked into her eyes. She was no longer just the timid admin assistant. Something in Amanda had realigned, like her inner compass had finally found true north. "From now on," I said, "I don't hire people out of trust. I hire them because they know what they bring to the table." Amanda nodded. I have a plan to position Nova as an independent brand, not built on anyone's shadow, not relying on family ties. I'll send you a first draft within 3 days. I said nothing more. Just pulled out my phone and sent a simple message to Nova's legal team. Prepare a provisional contract for Amanda Reed. Title: Director of Communications. Reports directly to me. Amanda looked at me with wide eyes. I simply smiled. 3 days. The next morning, as I was reviewing the new investment portfolio, my phone rang. Unknown number. But I recognized the name on the screen. Howard Klein. Founder of the independent pension fund Klein Consolidated. An old client from my early days at Reed. A man so reserved that in 5 years of working with him, I'd never heard him make a single joke. I've been following what you've done, he said after a few polite greetings. Brave. And very professional. Thank you, I replied. I just did what needed to be done. Here's the situation, he continued, his tone calm as if reading a quarterly report. I manage over $80 million in client assets, and I no longer trust the structure of Reed Capital. If you're willing to take it on, that money could move to Nova next quarter. I stayed silent, slightly stunned. But on one condition, he added. You must separate from them completely. Not just legally but in image. No meetings. No advisory roles. No looking back. I've already done that, Mr. Klein. Just finalizing some paperwork. I'll wait until everything's clear. But you should know, he paused, then spoke more slowly, there aren't many women like you in this industry. You don't need the Reed name. They're the ones who need you. When he hung up, I sat still for several minutes. His final words echoed in my mind. You don't need them. And that was something I'd spent years avoiding believing. I opened Nova's strategic development file. One section had previously read, No personal branding. Avoid conflict with Reed family. I deleted that line. Typed in bold. Independent identity strategy. Julia does not represent the past. Julia defines the future. That afternoon, Amanda sent me her draft for the first campaign. A steel blue color scheme, clean minimalist lines, the word Nova in a typeface cut sharp like a falling star. Beneath the logo, the tagline. We invest in vision. Not bloodlines. I read it over multiple times. Didn't change a word. Nova was no longer a place to shelter. It had become the place I truly began. With new allies. And with myself. 2 months after the loan agreement was signed, an urgent meeting request from Reed Capital landed in my personal inbox. No explanation, no attachments. Just the subject line, strategic restructuring, full attendance required, signed by Uncle Robert himself. I wasn't surprised. Even after stepping down from all official roles, I knew they'd reach out again. But not to push me out of the room. This time to try to keep me in it. The meeting was held in the 41st floor conference room, the one with the marble wall that used to display a portrait of Ben's grandfather, founder of Reed Capital. When I was a child, they used to bring me up here on Fridays. I'd sit in the far back swivel chair higher than my head, listening quietly, never allowed to speak. That day I walked into the room in a charcoal gray suit, hair neatly tied, carrying no folders. It was time. Everything that needed to be said was already in my head, and in my hands. Inside, all eyes turned to me as I approached the center seat at the round table. No one asked me to sit at the end. No one handed out a printed agenda. Uncle Robert stood first, his voice dry and low. We need a complete strategic restructuring. I gave a slight nod. I agree. But I no longer belong here. A silence fell across the room, sharp as a pin on glass. Aunt Carol opened her mouth as if to speak, but Uncle Robert's glance stopped her. I slowly placed both hands on the table, locking eyes with each person present. Ben hunched over pretending to check his phone. Uncle Edward, the man once tied to the money laundering deal, now sitting like a wax figure perfectly still. 8 years ago I came back from Harvard with a 3-step plan to restructure the investment portfolio and build a green growth fund, I began. I presented the idea in a small meeting, just 3 people in the room. You, Ben, and Aunt Carol. And the only feedback I got was, you should focus on supporting Ben better. I gave a faint smile, no anger, no bitterness. Just the truth. 3 years ago, when my financial algorithm boosted portfolio returns by 18%, The name listed on the report was Ben's. I stayed silent. Ben shrugged slightly as if to deny it, but no one spoke up to defend him. 2 months ago, I was invited to step aside. And I did. I paused, took a small slip of paper from my purse and placed it on the table. Today, I'm not here to accept an invitation back. I'm here to notify you that Nova Asset will be withdrawing the $5 million loan at the end of this quarter. Breaths quickened around the room. No 3-month notice required? Uncle Edward asked quickly. No, I replied. Because the supplemental clause was violated. Reed Capital altered internal ownership percentages without notifying its strategic partner. I have full rights to withdraw. Uncle Robert stared at me for a long moment. What do you want? I shook my head. I don't want anything anymore. I placed a second document on the table. I've also sent termination notices to every private client account associated with Reed Capital. Their portfolios will be fully transferred to Nova early next week. Ben shot up from his seat. You're tearing this company apart, Julia. I looked up and met his eyes directly. No, Ben. You're watching it collapse because of the people who were never worthy of running it. Aunt Carol finally spoke, her voice trembling. Could you forgive? Even just a little? I stayed silent for a few seconds. Then answered slowly, I was once the nameless child in this house. Told to sit still, eat less, speak softer. I used to think silence was the only way to be accepted. But no. I no longer need acceptance. I've redefined my worth. And today I'm the one valuing the very house that once pushed me out. I stood, gathered my papers and walked away. No one stopped me. No one called after me. The door closed behind me. But not because someone slammed it. This time because I chose to end a chapter. One morning in March, I was called to the Forbes studio for a photo shoot for their feature, Shaping the Future of Global Finance. Lights shimmered down on my neatly slicked back hair, the flash of the camera glittering like the glint of a new deal being signed. Could you tilt slightly to the left? The photographer smiled with a soft British accent. Perfect. Beautiful. The face of a woman who didn't ask for permission to be here. I nodded gently, not needing to pose. That face had been shaped by years of endurance, learning, observation, and choosing just the right moment to step out of the shadows. Nova Asset surpassed $1 billion in assets under management last week. But I didn't feel the need to throw a big celebration. I simply sent a short email to the entire staff. We're not just on the right path. We're creating a new one. Amanda is no longer Nova's director of communications. She came into my office early in the spring, her face a mix of nerves and excitement. I want to start my own company. A PR agency specializing in rebranding female-led businesses. I asked her, have you calculated your starting budget? Amanda handed me a neat folder. A 3-month launch plan, a 6-month expansion roadmap, and a list of potential partners. I skimmed through, then looked up. I'll invest $300,000. But not just the money. I want you to take me on as your strategic advisor. Amanda's eyes widened. Really? I smiled. I need to learn from people who dare to reinvent themselves too. A week later, she launched her company. At the first press conference, she stood on the podium and declared confidently to dozens of cameras, I didn't come from a family that empowered women to rise. But I came from a company that gave me the chance to do it. Today I'm passing that on. I sat in the back row and no one knew I was the primary investor. And that felt lighter than all the meetings where I used to fight for a seat at the table. One early summer Sunday, I drove south of Chicago, to the old wooden house where my biological parents once lived. A 2-story place with a small porch, maple leaves scattered from last fall. I had no intention of knocking. No warning. I just wanted to stand there for a moment, breathe in the scent of damp grass on the breeze, listen to the wind chimes by the door clink like they did when I was little. On the front door, taped with clear adhesive, was a small piece of paper. The handwriting tilted slightly, ink faded in some spots but still legible. We're proud of you. Mom, Dad. I read it 3 times. No explanation. No long letter. No apology. I smiled, not because I needed those words to forgive, but because I knew I didn't need them to believe in myself. Worth wasn't something I had to beg for, prove, or fight over anymore. Worth was something I'd built, piece by piece, from what others once saw as fragments. On the way back to the city, I turned on the car radio. A classical piece played, the strings rising and stretching like a long breath, like the calm I once believed I'd never feel. The light ahead turned green. I eased on the gas. And in that moment, I wasn't thinking of the people who turned their backs. I thought of the ones still walking forward. The women bold enough to break away, to stand tall, and to never ask permission to be themselves. What about you? If you had been in my shoes, would you have stayed silent to keep the peace? Or would you have stood up gently but firmly the way I did? Family isn't always just about love. Sometimes it's about the boundaries we must draw, the values we protect, and the journey one woman has to take to reclaim herself. If this story made you rethink your place in your family, or reminded you of a strong woman you've known, share your thoughts in the comments below. Every story we tell is a light that helps someone else find their way. And if you want to keep following real, powerful stories about family, identity, and reclaiming your worth, hit that follow button. Because there are many more stories waiting to be told, from the quiet corners of life that matter most.